We're elected. So we're back on Senate Education Committee, April 1st, 2025, after 2:30, back after for a break. Switching gears from miscellaneous ed bill to S15. Back to S15 that we looked at earlier in the session. As you all recall, what looked like it was a simple bill turned out to be a little more complicated than we initially thought. And I believe it was Senator Weeks who at one point actually made the suggestion that the parties who were coming in sort of wanting forward or opposed to moving forward get together and talk, and that actually happened. So we're back here today with what could be a path forward on the bill designed by the parties that we asked to talk to each other. And in anticipation of that, we asked our legislative council to go ahead and incorporate what they had done into something that we could walk through. And I note that you have, and as you mentioned to me, you've also prepared a side by side as well as the bill. So you've done this before. So where's yours?
Thank you, Bethany James' office.
So we'll do this. I'm sorry, one thing just to say, we're doing this perhaps in reverse order of what we might otherwise have done, which would be to have the parties come in first and tell us how they got to where they got to. But it's also true that doing this way might help inform that discussion because we'll have this behind us. So in any event, we're doing it this way. So now.
Thank you, Bethany James' office of legislative counsel. Would you like me to share my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I've got everything pulled up here. I think maybe we'll just start with your strike all amendment. So what I've done to incorporate some proposed language for you all that I think you're going to hear testimony about is I drafted a strike all committee amendment. It was getting a little complicated with all the instances of amendments having to move words and things. So we're just going to strike it all. So you would be proposing to amend section 2903. Subsection C. So you'll see all of this is unchanged. So current law, starting on page 221, reading instructions. So I guess we'll go up to line 18. A public school or approved independent school that is eligible to receive public tuition that offers instruction at grades 1, 2, or 3 shall provide systematic and explicit evidence-based reading instruction to all students. That is the current law. In addition, such schools would be current law. The proposal here is to strike such and say, in addition, for students in grades kindergarten through 12, public schools and approved independent schools that are eligible to receive public tuition shall provide supplemental reading instruction to any enrolled student whose reading proficiency falls, and then that modifier of significantly is new here, below proficiency standards for the student's grade level or whose reading proficiency prevents progress in school. School shall provide support and information to parents and legal guardians, period. The rest of that sentence is being proposed to be struck. So this is an amendment to S215. S215 is introduced, only made an amendment to the same section of law, but here's what S215 is introduced as suggesting. In addition, all public schools and approved independent schools that are eligible to receive public tuition shall provide supplemental reading instruction. So what I've done, so it's easier to see, is I've done side by side for you here. So the column on the left is actually the law prior to Act 139. So the column on the left was in effect prior to July 1 of 2024. Column in the middle is S215. And the column on the right is the proposed amendment you have in front of you today. So prior to Act 139, and if you're wondering what Act 139 did, you would look at the middle column and you just use your imagination, because I used making this 4 columns got to be a little too much. Act 139 would be the middle column without any changes. So you would keep such and you would get rid of all the underlined language. So prior to Act 139, this language read, a public school that offers instruction in grades 1, 2, or 3 shall provide highly effective research-based reading and instruction to all students. You can see that there's been changes made as you move through the columns. But since that language is not on the chopping block today, I haven't highlighted it. In addition, in the left-hand column there, right above subdivision 1, in addition, a school shall provide supplemental reading instruction to any enrolled student in grade 4 whose reading proficiency falls below 3rd grade reading expectations, and supplemental reading instruction to any enrolled student in grades 5 through 12 whose reading proficiency creates a barrier to the student's success in school, and then support and information to parents and legal guardians. Then Act 139 changed the left-hand column to the middle column. But you have to use your imagination and take out the strike-throughs and the underlined language. And this amendment that you are considering today on the right-hand column, you can see that Act 139 changed that to such schools, which would refer you back up to public schools or approved independent schools that offer instruction in grades K through 3. And we know that not all schools offer grades K through 3, right? There's high schools, there's some even elementary schools that don't start until maybe 3rd grade or 4th grade, right? There's the middle schools, there's all different subsets of grades. So using this term such in the middle column here would refer you back up here. So such schools would be eligible to receive public tuition. S215, it was suggesting to change that to all public schools and approved independent schools that are eligible to receive public tuition would provide supplemental reading instruction. The amendment before you is stating that for students in grades K through 12, public schools and approved independent schools that are eligible to receive public tuition shall provide supplemental reading instruction to any enrolled student whose proficiency falls significantly below proficiency standards. And then there's a proposal to get rid of the language at the very bottom of the end of the last sentence, which would actually just bring it back to conform with what the law was prior to Act 139. Questions for me?
That is exciting. Thank you. Clear, slowly, crystal.
So what we have then is the K through 3 program that was initially envisioned with now this language about what happens.
So what you don't see in this bill is all of the other parts of Act 139. And Act 139 was really focused on the first 3 grades, or K through 3. And so what this particular subsection in this particular section is saying is that a public school or an approved independent school, if you offer grades 1 through 3, you have to provide systematic and explicit evidence-based reading instruction to all of your students. And that tracks with language that appears in other statutes related to reading instruction. The change here would be that for all students in grades K through 12, they would get supplemental reading instruction if their reading proficiency falls significantly below proficiency standards. Act 139 had that word such in there to modify schools, which would refer you back up to those grades 1 through 3 for the supplemental reading instruction. The change in front of you, or the amendment in front of you, would sweep in everyone K through 12 for supplemental reading instruction if their reading proficiency falls significantly below proficiency standards for that student's grade level or prevents progress in school.
So to the extent that this was primarily about K through 3 previously, it no longer is. Now it's just K through 12 with the same standard. Is that accurate?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by previously. The language regarding providing systematic and explicit evidence-based reading instruction to all students in grades K through 3 has not changed.
Okay.
The requirement that there be supplemental reading instruction for grades other than K through 3. I believe that was what was also proposed in S215. And the amendment you have in front of you has some different wording.
If you touch on the difference in that with the practical, well, maybe the
I think from a legal perspective, the term significantly is added in the amendment that you have in front of you today. That does not appear in S215 or S15. I think from a legal perspective, I'm not seeing much of a difference between the language in S215 regarding the rest of the students. But I understand that my knowledge as your legislative lawyer and the words on the page can differ significantly from how the law is carried out in the field.
let's say Henry, no. Any questions for? So can you stick around? Yeah.
Let me just stop sharing my screen. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Side by side. So I'll leave it to you how you want to couple going together, however you want to do it.
Gonna go first. I can, you know, I looked at the order of presenters.
The order doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
It's up to you. Go ahead.
So,
If she gonna go first? No, she is. No, you go ahead.
sure. So thank you so much. If you have copies, and it looks like you have copies as well, so that's terrific. We have teachers, we always have to be prepared. Should be three.
Okay. Yeah, we have that one. Well. It's.
I didn't even put one out.
Yeah, no,
Here we are.
Yeah.
We all have.
Thank you so much.
Will it?
Yeah, okay.
You're
I'm sorry.
No,
No
no
worries.
worries.
We're done.
Maybe somebody else.
It's just making.
There is, we need one more up here.
Oh.
Okay.
All righty.
So, we've all met, I think, by this point, so you've been very good. So rather than so, just introduce yourself to the record, and off we go.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Doreen Dorfman. Thanks, Doreen. Thank you so much for having me this afternoon. And I am going to ask for forgiveness right now, which is that there is some redundancy with what I'm presenting compared to what St. James just presented. So it's very exciting to see the degree of alignment we have achieved. It's amazing what people can do collaborating. So in February, differing testimonies heard by the Senate Education Committee on S15 led our committee chair, Mr. Bongartz, to request those involved to, quote, get on the same page, quote. Quickly, Ms. Carmoli, Mr. Nichols, Ms. Gardner-Morse, and I followed up. We are proud to stand before you today in full support of supplementary reading instruction for K-12 students who are significantly below grade level proficiency. We request that the Senate Education Committee include this important provision in a miscellaneous education bill this legislative session, such as in H480, an act relating to miscellaneous amendments to education law. While Vermont has a statewide model of the multi-tier system of supports, MTSS, which is a comprehensive approach to teaching and learning, last year, Vermonters acted on the need to reverse downward trends in student reading performance. In passing Act 139, Vermont joined 40-plus states around the U.S. in passing an effective K-3 literacy law. However, Act 139 removed from Vermont statute the previous provision for supplemental instruction for struggling readers at any grade level. This created an inequity and gaps in reading intervention and support across schools and districts statewide. Today, we come together to recommend a small correction in the state statute, Section 516-2903, preventing early school failure reading instruction. The current policy statement in Vermont law recognizes the need to fundamentally address student reading, a statement of policy. This is not changing. That is, whether you change law or not, like this is what exists now, is not in question. The ability to read is critical to success in learning. Children who fail to read by the end of first grade will likely fall further behind in school. The personal and economic costs of reading failure are enormous, both while the student remains in school and long afterward. We submit to you a small change in 16 VSA 2903 that restores the intent of the law for K-12 supplemental reading instruction prior to Act 139. Please see the attached memorandum, which we provided copies for you regarding this. And you already have had a great walkthrough of that revised language, which I have highlighted here as well. So we can jump right onto page 3. So this small revision to the law leaves the other important revisions of Act 139 fully intact. Senator Bongartz, you had just asked about that. So those included strengthening teacher preparation programs and evidence-based literacy practices, as well as training all K-3 teachers and administrators to conduct valid, reliable reading screening, analyze the results, inform parents and guardians of those significantly below, and design effective reading instruction. So that would not occur grades 4 through 12, what I just described. That's really what Act 139 does, with the exception of strengthening teacher preparation programs. That's at the higher ed level regardless. So in my previous testimony, I discussed at length the decline of Vermont reading performance among 4th and 8th graders as measured on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the nation's report card. The most recent 2024 scores show that the largest proportion of Vermont 4th graders, 42%, read at below basic. A below basic score is the lowest, indicating those students cannot read anywhere near grade level. Then and today, I come to you as a private citizen and do not represent my professional role as a grade 5-8 teacher at Barrytown Middle and Elementary School. For nearly 30 years, I've served Vermont students as their teacher and principal, including the last 4 as a licensed reading specialist. I see the reading crisis up close in the low skills and frightened faces of my students. They want to learn to read. This month, the Project for Adolescent Literacy, PAL, published a report to illuminate the views of over 500 reading teachers in middle and high schools across the country. The top cause teachers cited for struggling adolescent readers was the, quote, lack of opportunity provided in early grade levels to learn how to read well, unquote. Act 139, passed last year, provides that opportunity in grades K-3. However, for the past 20 to 30 years in Vermont and across the English-speaking world, students received instruction now shown to be harmful to their reading development. Thousands of these students are still attending our schools in Vermont. They need this opportunity to learn. It's called TL. Evidence-based reading instruction and intervention is the most important OTL that schools provide. In the PAL study, one teacher explained that learning to read is the biggest thing, quote, students can do to improve the quality of their lives and prepare them for the future. It is the gateway to a successful life, unquote. Let's open this gateway for all K-12 students reading significantly below proficiency to access evidence-based literacy intervention and receive the support needed to close equity gaps and achieve their full potential. We educational leaders have come together and request that educational equity for K-12 supplemental reading instruction be restored in Vermont law. I would be happy, of course, to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Any questions? Go ahead, Senator Sahab.
Thank you, Chair. So what was the, before, in the wording, it was, that was the keeping attention between the two of you, in the wording, I forget now, that, and obviously you've come to an agreement. What was the hang up? As you recall?
I think we needed just clarity with each other of what Act 139 provided and specifically what we were asking for in terms of supplementary reading instruction for older students. So I think that's really what we just needed. I mean, we spent a good amount of time and had some drafts back and forth to really be able to pinpoint just where we came to an agreement. And I would say we didn't really come to any disagreement when we talked about adding the word significantly. We felt that made a lot of sense. A student can be just below grade level, but we're really concerned about like that 42% of fourth graders who are reading at below basic. They're the students we want to reach. I think the special education percentage in Vermont is 18%. Is that right? Okay, so it's about 18%, a little higher than that.
I can wait till just.
And so so it's not just students who are eligible for special education who would get that specialized services, but quite a bit more who are still in the general education program, who should not be necessarily considered for special education, but should be able to get the supplemental reading instruction.
So words like significantly are a little ambiguous. How come you chose a word like that as opposed to a level, because you guys are all educators, the level of the reading, you know, the NAEP scores or what have you, because you're not really giving us anything to kind of punch a threshold into. You're leaving it very ambiguous. I'm not really sure that's where you wanted to leave us.
So I'm happy to say that the Agency of Education has provided significant guidance this fall and to winter, and they have defined what is significantly below in terms of which parents need to be contacted of the students who perform significantly below in grades K through 3. So usually an assessment, and we don't have consistency of which assessments are being used in the schools as the universal screener. That's not in state statute. That's in addition to state tests. That's something different. The annual test.
Unfortunately, AOE is not in Rome.
Sorry.
AOE is not
Okay, but
in
I can explain just a little bit more if you don't mind. So generally it's on a 4-point scale, and there are different descriptors for below grade basic. Sometimes it's called urgent intervention. Sometimes it is called significantly below, depending on the assessment. But if we look at it numerically, we're talking about the students who are in the 1 category, 4 meaning proficient with distinction, 3 proficient, 2 below, and 1 significantly below. So the AOE has provided that writing in their screening guidance. I don't know if that fully answers your question,
Well,
but it helps the school.
You know, it's because everything we do, just like, well, everything we're doing, you know, words matter. And I'm just curious, first off, if you're intending to catch, if the intent here now is to catch everybody who's the 42% and below, or at some level below that, or what?
Is it okay? Generally, it's the bottom quartile.
So identify yourself,
What-
identify yourself for the record.
Sorry, Gwendolyn Carmelite, Director of Curriculum in Colchester, and I serve as the Chair of the Advisory Council on Literacy. And the Agency of Education has provided that guidance based on a number, as you were saying, of different screeners or different ways. And they generally do it at the 25th percentile or below. So the bottom quartile is significantly below. That's generally how it works. The reason we use significant versus just below. Someone could be really close to grade level. This is really about the students who are farther away from grade level, that we make sure they have a supplemental lesson. An
So
additional lesson.
So you're saying that the word significantly actually is defined within within the lexicon
Yes.
to operate.
Yes.
Okay. So,
Well, from a layperson's perspective, I disagree with that. If I were an academic or a field academic, I would want you to say, if the word is significantly below grade level, as outlined in the NAEP test or some other relative, scale
Mhm.
that everybody recognizes, and case closed, done deal. But significantly below just kind of leaves it like, and then the other real question is, why don't we want to bring that whole 42% up? Why are we going down to 25 or 18 or whatever, settle on? Why not the whole 42%? Why not target that whole cadre? Because we go out to talk to constituents and we share with them the reading NAEP test scores. They're horrified. They really are. And they want us to do something about it. So I'm wondering, perfect vehicle.
I'm gonna ask you to just look at page 3, where we have that 42% of red here. So that's not the quartile. That's the percentage of the students who are in the bottom quartile. Does that, so on page 3 of my testimony, I have that triangle. It says Vermont reading needs. So where that 42% is in that 25th percentile or below. It doesn't change per school. We're not saying 25%, the lowest 25% of the school. The assessments that we administer are based on national norms.
Yeah, I get that.
Okay.
That's what we're reacting to.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is that all 42% of those students would receive that instruction if we use
Yeah, but
the school street.
see, then you're using the term here, below basic, as opposed to
Significant.
whatever, significantly below. I mean, let's just like nail it.
Mhm.
Like not ambiguous, make sure we got the right demographic, right group of students, just nail it. That's just my.
But do you have any thoughts about this piece?
I've several thoughts.
To feel,
If you,
since
if
you
you'd like to
are,
hear it.
so identify yourself for the record. Sure.
I'm Bud Myers, formerly Deputy Commissioner, Department of Education, now the Agency of Education. Taught for 43 years, statistics and measurement at the University of Vermont, and ran the Jeffords Center. I think I've sent all of you considerable amount of testimony. And this, but to directly address your question, the term significantly refers to statistically significantly. And what that means is you need to be 95% sure that the score that you're using as a cut score is accurate given the error in measurement of the tests that you're using. So when you define that band, that error band for the NAEP score, and you set the cut score for defining where those kids are going to fall below, you have already accounted for a 95% confidence interval. And that's inherent, it's built in. They were both right when they told you what significantly means. The definition that the Agency of Education is using for significant, that triggers the action of the schools to contact the parents, that accounts for that error band.
I hear and agree with everything you say, but now we have to ensure that we can take action with this legislation. And I'm not sure that significantly below is enough because we're not relating it to anything, to the test scores, to.
Okay, let me just go a little bit further. When you look at that band on the little triangle there. That accounts for the significance that you need in order to be sure that when the agency of education tells the schools, contact the parents, you're within a legal definition, really, of what is statistically significant on that particular test. That's what they do. That's what they published. I was thrilled when they started doing that, what I thought a few years ago. We tried to get that when I was deputy commissioner of assessment. We tried to get that written into law. Couldn't do it. It was a little too complicated, I think, at the time. But now we've got it in practice in the agency.
Okay, so help me out here. You're not trying to make this complicated. I'm actually trying to make this very simple. Something we can action. Why not say, instead of significantly below proficiency standards, just say, performing below basic in NAEP 4th grade performance, reading performance. I mean, just make it very.
You could say it that way, but I think when you say it significantly below the standards, you're communicating to the public that you're making a definition that accounts for the best that the science has to offer in terms of accounting for the test error. For years, I would come and testify to the House and Senate Ed committees about test error in our assessments. And it was horrific because trying to communicate to the public that you were accurately identifying kids who needed assessment and needed additional help in school, which triggered dollars, obviously, for tutorials and all the rest of it. Unless you could really be sure that you were accounting for the error, you couldn't make that determination. I hear you. You're absolutely right. I mean, you're raising the question that needs to be raised. I think that the Agency of Education has answered that question in the way that they define significant.
Just to simplify it for the layman, is there a possibility we could significantly put in a definition of significant? I mean, you laid it out perfectly, but you know, if I'm a parent, you come to me and say your child has significant below the reading level it should be at. If there was some way that we could just point to explain that.
Sort of related to that, I wonder if it could be something like as defined by the Agency of Education.
Yes.
And so then they are providing the guidance and the specifications of what that is. And then within this, that signals go there.
Exactly. And it would pertain to the specific measure that they're using to trigger it. And it's going to be different depending on the measure. DIBELS is one kind of test that triggers schools to contact parents. Need to account for the measurement error in any test that you're using when you make a determination of spending the people's money. That's what they're trying to do now.
Yes.
I just have one more response to NAEP. We don't receive individual student assessment scores on NAEP, and it's only done in 2 grades. So it's grade 4 and grade 8, and we get statewide scores. But it doesn't give us how each student does. So it'd be that, I love the example. I wish I had that information.
But how do you personalize?
So we use other assessment screeners. So some use
Like your
iReady, that they do. So in the AOE guidance, because each school system is assessing and is using different assessments, I would say.
That use listen. Somehow we've got to define who we're targeting. Can't just significantly below. It's just rigorous.
Senator Hershey.
Just a comment. I hear where you're coming from, and I appreciate specificity too, but I think that one of the things that should be taken into consideration is that I think a lot of these assessments over years change. Some assessments are maybe not as effective, or new assessments are found that are more effective. And so if the AOE finds, let's just say hypothetically, in a couple of years, NAEP scores aren't actually that great, but there is this new assessment that works a whole lot better, or if we want to start using that, but it's written into law, going to require a constant revision cycle. So I would agree on trying to find some more specificity, but I wouldn't want to get too specific in such a way that it requires constant revision.
I wonder if what's leading to some confusion here is the fact that we're identifying NAEP as a standard which triggers public concern about the proficiency of kids having to read. I think that's what's happening. That you look at the NAEP scores, particularly over time, those graphs that are on the other page of the handout that you got there. You look at that, it's very concerning. It's getting worse. And the gaps between low income and other kids, special needs kids and other kids, are growing over time. That's with the NAEP as a standard. That's not what we're talking about, I think, in the law, about triggering intervention from the agency to the school district saying, you really need to contact the parents here because your kid, according to the standard that your school is using, is significantly below. And what that means, you can take that to the bank because it's beyond the error band of the tests that they're using to make that determination. We're not talking about NAEP being used to make that determination on this. That's what's triggering your concern about why this is such a problem for us right now. Now, there's a high correlation between performance on the NAEP, performance on other state standardized assessments, and many of the local assessments that the school districts are using. When you put kids, on the same scale for all those different tests, you're going to find a whole lot of very similar performance, but it won't be exactly the same. And for some kids, it won't be statistically significantly different from the standard. So that's why that language is in there. From my point of view, as a guy who did this for, 50 years now, it's the right thing. You're doing it right.
So I was gonna ask you, what happens now in school when you recognize that? How is this gonna change what actually happens on the ground? Because you see now a child, that they're below, they've been tested below, maybe they've been significantly below. You must be interacting and trying to work on that right now. And what's the difference between what you're doing now, when you have that situation, and what this will bring to bear?
I think, permission to speak?
I was asking you a question.
Yeah. So when the VPA director, Jay Nichols, spoke, he talked about the huge variety around the state. I think he used the term, schools are all over the place in what they provide.
Right.
And when you have the perspective, K-12, as the curriculum director of your school, so you have essentially a model for what we hope every district can emulate. That's not necessarily the case elsewhere. It has typically not been the case that there is a reading specialist in middle and high school who is working outside of special education. So like specifically in my school, we screen the students, we find the students who are flagged, we conduct diagnostic assessments to determine what are the causes of their reading difficulties. We group the students by those same barriers, and we and I teach those groups, and they're grouped by those skills. So it's regardless of what kind of plan they have. I may have a group where 3 kids have a special education plan and 1 kid does not, or the opposite. But that's not necessarily the case. And that was the direction that Barrytown decided to go in. In other schools, it may be you have to have a plan, like a special education plan in order to qualify for this level of service, which is 40 to 50 minutes a day in a small group 4 to 5 times a week, plus additional instruction if I find that a student is not keeping up with the group because they may have even deeper deficits that I have to keep supplementing during other times of the day. But I want to, if you don't mind, I think Gwen's perspective would be really helpful on this in terms of, and maybe what you see in other districts.
Well, I think our biggest concern was that with the shift, with the revision of statute 2903, a provision that was there before for grades 4 through 12 was removed. Act 139 was focusing on grades K to 3. So statute 2903 focused on K to 3, but took out that the bottom of the column that Ms. St. James was showing us on the left-hand side. This restores that and gives the requirement for every school that has those grades to make sure that they are using some way to screen the students and provide that supplemental instruction for those students. We already have MTSS, but it's not specific to literacy and it's not specific to any grades. And so this is a way to bring back what had been removed in language, hold the schools accountable, which also says to the Agency of Education, how do we provide resources for this? How do we make sure we get the guidance on what is significantly below? What are those appropriate screeners? What are the evidence-based practices for grades 4 through 12? So I think it was more about restoring language to make sure that our schools are providing it. On the ground, it is variable. I think it is unfortunately variable. But when you remove language, it can become much more variable. And then I don't have to be paying attention to that and providing it. Possibly. I mean, I do. I worry about it.
And we invited the Superintendent's Association in today, and they declined, saying you can kind of talk with them. There,
She is here.
oh, she's on the,
Yeah.
oh, let's have her bring her in. She's just been listening. Okay. Let me just ask you the question, Chelsea. When you were here before, you had a concern about, the superintendents had a concern about adding more, I'll just use the term requirements, I guess, on top of what you did with the bill the legislature with the bill last year. But I think I also know the Superintendent's Association has been involved in these discussions. And so can you just talk to us about, to the extent your thinking has changed and you're now on board for this, if that's the case, how that came about and why you feel enough different about the language now compared to what it was?
Hi, Chelsea Myers, Executive Director of the Vermont Superintendents Association. I am having a little bit of internet trouble today, so if I cut out, I apologize. Just to clarify, we did not testify on the record about this bill prior. I was unfortunately unavailable at that time, but I think you have captured it correctly that we agree with the compromise language that our colleagues have come to. We were not a part of those discussions, but Gwen and Jay have kept me very apprised of them and are supportive of the language that is presented today.
Okay. So you're supportive of it. Okay. Thank you. Did you actually have testimony you wanted to deliver?
I did.
Yeah. Come on.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me here today. Glenn Carmoli, Chair of the Advisory Council on Literacy. And I serve in a couple different roles. I'm a Director of Curriculum for a school system pre-K through 12. And I'm co-president of the Vermont Curriculum Leaders. So I work with curriculum directors and assistant superintendents across the state. And I work with my colleagues, Superintendents Association, Principals Association, School Board Association. I work with a lot of different colleagues. What I want to say is that to me, this was really about getting to a yes, yes, as opposed to one or the other. And it was important that we talked about in a small language change for S2903. It actually had some impact on Act 139. If we make 2903 4 through 12, we had to clarify what Act 139, which was an early literacy law, was, how those fit together. And so some of the compromise actually wasn't even, some of it was about language that we presented. Some of it was about how do we make sure that we preserve that K-3 law that was really important, that's under implementation, so that when we say 4 through 12, we're not screening every student on phonemic awareness and phonics in middle school and high school. We are providing services based on probably a comprehension screener, which would be appropriate for those grades, versus in grades K-3, we have a set of requirements in Act 139 that we worked on. That was, I think, the most important part of our work, and it's hard to find that yes, yes, and yet they were great at saying what their advocacy for was really Dr. Dorfman and Ms. Gardner-Morris. It was really about how do we provide for those students in grades 4 through 12. And my advocacy was, how do we make sure that this law that's just been passed, that has so much good and is under implementation, is still going to work? How do we have those two things? So our agreement was really about that. The agreed upon language were small technical pieces, like, are we making sure that this is any student who's below grade level, who might be a little bit below grade level, or farther away from grade level? And we decided that it was really, we were talking about the students who were farther away from grade level. That's where the significant thing came from. The language part that we worked on about cutting off sort of the end, if you imagine the side-by-side that Ms. James was showing, that we cut off the valid and reliable part. And we wanted to make sure that parents were informed, but that it didn't use the same language that sat inside in the valid and reliable. It didn't sit in the same language that sat in Act 139. We were really trying to avoid confusion. What's Act 139 saying for K-3? And what are we saying for students in grades 4 through 12? And what we were saying is that when a student is far below grade level, significantly was the word we used, that that's the requirement that we would provide supplemental instruction. And we would make sure that that we notified the parents. So shouldn't use that term notify, because that was in Act 139, that we contact the parents and we work with the parents on that. So really, I think we came with the same goal. We want every student to be a successful reader. We want to increase achievement by a lot. We had that goal heading into this. But we also wanted to make sure that what had just been passed and what had just been removed was taken into account. And so S15, this language that we're talking about here, is trying to put something back in and trying to preserve Act 139.
So a legal question. So if this passes, is that gonna amend 139? Or
That's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. Act 139 contains a whole bunch of law.
Mhm.
If S115 passes, either as introduced or as you are proposing to amend it, you would be amending a specific piece of law, not touching anything else.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Not to be redundant, but why not target all the students reading below their grade?
So I could use a high school student as an example. A student might be reading half a grade level below. Usually when you're using a screener, in my school system, we use Renaissance Star. It might give me a Lexile level. It might say, so this might be an 11th grade student, and the student may show 10.5, half of a year below grade level. That student probably needs some scaffolding, a little bit of support by the classroom teacher. That's really different than a second lesson by a trained professional in literacy. In addition to literacy, their humanities or their literacy course that they're taking. So close to grade level is very different from an instructional point of view from someone who's multiple grade levels behind. Someone who's multiple grade levels behind, we need extra instruction, intensive extra instruction.
So where do you make that distinction, whether you need an interventionist or whether, you know, he's close enough that he can meander into the next grade without additional support? That's kind of what I'm driving for.
Right.
Where is that?
So in the K-3, with the passing of Act 139, they published two different pieces of guidance so far. One was about which screeners to use, and another was about parental notification. And in the which screeners to use, it said, they used this term significantly below, and they listed a number of different assessments and said, here's the language the assessment would use. Some of them say intensive intervention. Some of them say, but it's related to who is in that lowest section of readers. And those are the ones we provide the most intensely. Well, it varies. If I'm in fourth grade, it's gonna, it varies. It is not the same amount behind with grade level. It's more about on a curve or on a quartile where it's generally the first quartile is the lowest that you would pick, that we would provide those intensive supports. But that's a generality. As Dr. Myers was indicating, it really varies by the assessment, and they do validity and reliability tests, and then they indicate what those score, how to interpret those scores. From a school system, we take the state's guidance, we take the assessments guidance, and we say who is in that lowest section that we're going to provide the supports for. And we're working to provide supports for students every day, all the time. It's just when it's that second lesson with that trained professional, we have to think about what's a consistent way I can make that decision.
Bud Myers again, you raised my name. So I just love it the way you keep raising this issue, because it is the hardest issue that we have to deal with in assessment. It was the hardest thing that I've ever tried to teach my students at UVM. The variability of measurement of assessment. That's what you're talking about here. I mean, maybe I can give you a couple of examples that'll help. I've got a whole raft of them, but I'll just try a couple. If let's say I've got a test where it looks like the cut score, the failure rate would be 241. So I set that as my cut. Anybody below 241 fails. Anybody above 241 passes, right? But now I understand that 241 score is not a perfect measure of whatever it is I'm trying to measure. Let's say it's reading in this case. Every test has measurement error. It's called the standard error of measurement. And that error of measurement usually encompasses about 15 percentile points, plus or minus the cut score. That's how it works. When kids were identified as needing special services, some parents would say, oh, my kid's dumb? Are you telling me my kid is dumb? And you'd say, no, we're not saying that. We're saying that this kid needs some services. Well, why are you saying that? Well, because below 241. Oh, no, that's not the way it works here, because I know, I'm an informed parent, right? I know that 241 is plus or minus 15 other points. Oh, so my kid, to be really more accurate about where he or she falls on this measurement scale, really ought to be 15 points below where you said. Oh, so that's how this works. Yeah. So let's set it within that error band, plus or minus 15 points. That's what we define as statistically significantly below. That's how it's done. This is one of the hardest things you'll ever learn. I got to tell you, I really struggled over the years.
So that before you go, I'm wondering whether, I guess we have after this, but whether we do, whether it would make sense or to add following up at least part of what Sarah's trying to get at, where it makes sense to say with regard to the word significantly as defined by the agency.
I think that's a policy question.
Okay.
And if your policy experts think that works, I don't see a legal reason not to include it.
Yes.
But Ken, the only step that's missing here is the AOE. I'm really surprised that they don't put their fingerprint right on this and say, good to go, we can enact, we got it. It's got the, we meet the intent and off we go. Without that, I'm feeling kind of fuzzy.
Okay, we'll talk later. Yeah, okay, thanks.
I will, can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
Sorry. I will just say, if you put that in statute and you don't like how AOE has defined that word eventually, you are stuck with that and you will have to change that. So there's lots that happens to execute the laws outside of statute, right? Because if you put every little nuance in statute, our green books would take up the whole building. So from a legal perspective, I don't think you necessarily have to, but if you do add it, you're stuck with it until you make a change in the future.
Yes.
I'm not advocating for a language change, but I just want to underscore that because I'm sitting here thinking, what is Vermont Reads and how is it related to this? And do you all support that? Is it layering on top of what you're already doing? Is it uplifting what you're doing?
Sure, it absolutely does.
Okay.
So Vermont Reads, and I speak with Emily Lesh at the agency pretty regularly,
Okay.
and she is supportive and appreciative of the effort, both Act 139, the proposed language that we brought on S15, and the willingness to sit down and continue to work through this. Vermont Read, I think it's Read Vermont, the initiative. I can't remember which word comes first.
I only heard the two words, whichever order. So yeah.
It is providing professional learning across the state in grades. Some is specific to K to 3 and some is pre-K through 12.
Okay.
They're really working to increase the readiness of every school and every professional. They're offering coaching through the Stern Center. They are working with an organization called Literacy Associates to provide some of the guidance, to help with some of the guidance. And they're working very hard on raising the professional knowledge and ability to apply that knowledge in the K to 3 classrooms and then any classroom K to 12. So they work really well together. I think
I'm also glad you mentioned the Stern Center.
Yeah.
They're my neighbors.
Oh, there we go. And it's excellent work that's happening, and they're going into schools and providing coaching and providing professional learning opportunities. And some are online, so people don't even have to, and at the end of the day, so they don't have to attend in person. There are a lot of good things happening. I just want to underscore, this was really about how can we preserve and restore.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, I actually have two. So conceivably, we're eventually gonna identify the grades 4 through 12 that have significant reading problems. So eventually, once they're all identified and we find the reading program for them to catch up, eventually you're gonna catch it in pre-K through 3 anyway. So it's kind of like me, I had amblyopia and nobody knew it and I couldn't see the board. And when I was finally somebody said, you know, eye turns in, probably had to send them to an eye doctor. And there was nothing that anybody could do at that point, but what we're talking about here is we can. So what, my second question is, what's the program for these? Are they gonna have to do extra classes, summer courses to catch up? Or are they gonna be able to do it all in stride?
It's usually a second lesson within the school day. That's what we aim to do. Not every school system has the ability or the funding to do it outside of school. And sometimes there's an intervention block that's set in a school system. They call it different things, but it's usually a second lesson. So they've taken their English course if you're in middle, if you're in high school, you've taken your language arts class if you're in middle school, and then you would have a second course. Might be a little bit shorter because some of the classes are 90-minute blocks, or so it might be, as you were saying, a half hour, 45 minutes. Sometimes it's an hour, but it's a second lesson multiple days a week. For someone who's significantly below, it might be 4 or 5 days a week. And the aim is to catch them up, really to meet that student's needs and accelerate the learning.
So the idea is we're gonna catch it. We're gonna get the remedial instruction that they need, or or find out that they have a vision problem.
Yeah,
Ideally.
yeah, and some of our students are already receiving some services. So they may be on an IEP for a reading need. Some may have a different learning difficulty. So it's just making sure that we are required as schools to be watching for who has this big need and are we going to provide this service.
Thank you.
We have to actually stop in a bit, but how do you identify if the child is outside one of the years that you're really doing testing, freshman in high school, for instance, or something like that? How do you pick that student up, recognizing that they're...
Well, in my system, we assess every student 3 times a year.
Oh,
and we
okay.
start in kindergarten and we go up through grade 10, and we're in discussion about expanding to 11 and 12. So every year in the fall, we start out with an assessment, and then we assess in the middle of the year, and then we assess in the springtime. And for reading, that we would use that fall measure ideally to say who needs supplemental instruction.
Questions? Okay. Thank you. Feels good. Thanks to all of you. And thanks for the work.
Nice to meet you.
Same here.
And yeah, thank you all for going the extra step and putting this together for us.
Well, I would put the thanks right back here as well. You made the suggestion. You were hearing 2 different perspectives, and you said, can we get in the same room and work this out? And you are open to continuing to move it forward. So I would say thank you as well. Thank you to my colleagues.
Someone make it a perfect motion.
Well, thank you. And with that, we are adjourned.